What would happen if you combined the best aspects of Hotline Miami with Nightcrawler from the X-Men series? Well, you'd get a little game called Mr. Shifty, which came out for the Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and of course Windows and Mac. And that Hotline Miami comparison runs pretty deep, as the fast-paced combat and instant player deaths are going to remind you of the game very often. So that means I'm going to be comparing the two games quite a lot in this review. But is it actually good or just a waste of your time and money? Let's find out! The game plays a little bit slower than Hotline Miami, where you could either assess the situation and plan out your strategy, or throw yourself at the enemy until you killed everyone, which was usually the better option. Mr. Shifty, however, requires you to use the former option, as enemies are usually placed in such a way that you'll have to figure out the best strategy first. As I said before, it's more of a slower action puzzler than an action brawler like Hotline Miami was. The game does give you a lot of different ways to finish stages though, especially through the teleportation ability. One of the best things about Mr. Shifty is the large variety in enemies. Hotline Miami only had melee guys, ranged guys, and fat melee and ranged guys. Mr. Shifty on the other hand says, why stop there? And throws in enemies with rocket launchers, grenade launchers, auto shotguns, ninjas, those annoying Black Ops enemies from Half-Life, and many more. These offer up a lot of very creative puzzle rooms, and many enemy combinations can really test your skills. It's funny that these guys made Hotline Miami meet Team Fortress 2 before I did. It is important to note that while Mr. Shifty can die in only one hit, all enemies require about 3 to 4. This means that you can't just rush into a room and kill everyone instantly. Instead, constantly teleporting back and forth between different rooms and taking out enemies one by one is the best strategy. This doesn't mean that combat is boring or tedious, no. Especially some of the later levels constantly keep you on your toes because enemies are constantly moving in from all directions or because the level keeps changing. You can also pick and throw certain weapons, all of which will kill enemies instantly. My favorite is the 2x4, or rather the 2x8, which has a ridiculously long range. Aside from throwing them, there are no ranged weapons of any kind, and everything you pick up can only be used a couple of times before breaking. This means that you have to constantly adapt to new situations and can't just run through the entire level with the same weapon, like you could in Hotline Miami. The enemy placement in general is pretty smart, with every single one serving some sort of purpose. Never do they really just stand around randomly, there's always an intended way of taking them out. And never once did I feel cheated because the game just spawned in a ton of super difficult enemies to artificially increase the difficulty. Only near the end does the game throw a ton of different enemies at you at once, in those big arenas similar to something like Smash TV. I was honestly frustrated during those moments, however it only happened about 2 or 3 times in total, so it's forgivable. The game even somewhat accommodates this with the bullet time feature. By killing a certain amount of enemies, a meter will fill up, which will then be automatically used to slow down time if you get near any bullets. This makes many battles, and especially the enemy gauntlets, a lot easier. You could call this easy mode, however, filling up the meter is not so easy, as it ticks down at about the same rate as it fills up, so you really have to kill many enemies rapidly in a row. Bullet time also doesn't get triggered by flames, rockets or grenades, and it only lasts for a few seconds, which means that it's a very powerful yet situational and rare ability. It also means that saving it up for more difficult battles is a smart idea, and I even let myself get killed a couple of times when I used it too early on accident. Another thing that the game does incredibly well is the pacing. It has an absolutely excellent difficulty curve with a lot of action, but also some downtime in between. Sometimes the enemy has the upper hand, sometimes you do, just to make you feel powerful. The game also does a very good job at teaching you the different game mechanics. First, it shows you how they work, then it lets you try them out, and then it tests you on what you've learned. Never did I feel like I had no idea what I was supposed to do, except once when I didn't know I had to punch a wall, and even if I didn't realize it at first, I quickly found out after experimenting. Later stages even take your teleportation ability away, which means you'll have to rethink everything you've learned so far, but it doesn't really feel annoying or anything. Instead, you'll be quote-unquote teleporting around with your punches and pick your battles much more carefully. It actually reminds me of that bit in Half-Life after you get captured and lose all of your weapons. It ironically adds a lot by taking something away from the player. I never really felt bored, and every single level and the entire game in fact were exactly as long as they needed to be. Nothing dragged on for too long and everything flowed together seamlessly. I feel like the shorter levels would work perfectly for playing the game on the Nintendo Switch while you're sitting on a train or something. Just boot up a level, finish it, and then go back to what you were doing before. The controls did feel a bit awkward at first, however, but that was mostly due to me being used to Hotline Miami's controls and expecting something different. I got used to them pretty quickly, however, and it was never big of an issue. The game actually recommends you using a gamepad, which I didn't try out because I don't like playing fast-paced games with controllers, but I really do appreciate that the game seems to be built around it, which is great for console players. Mr. Shifty's tone is quite tongue-in-cheek as it's a parody of comic book superheroes, with Mr. Shifty even being directly based on Nightcrawler from the X-Men series, as I've pointed out in the beginning. The story is pretty bland, but it works well as a parody. The game knows you aren't there for the story, so it's not afraid to make fun of itself. There's also only 3 main characters in the game, 2 of which actually speak, but each of them have some very hilarious lines, which honestly made me laugh out loud at times. The soundtrack, on the other hand, is a bit forgettable. It does have some really catchy songs, but it repeats them very often as well, which does get tiring after a while. Still, the tracks do fit the game very nicely. Attacks sound very meaty and the enemy grunts are all very distinct, which makes combat feel very powerful at times. If there's one thing I didn't like about Hotline Miami, it's that certain sounds often weren't very fitting, but Mr. Shifty doesn't have that issue in the slightest. Graphics are nothing special, but passable. However, enemies have very distinct colors and even fade to black once they're killed. Together with wall and floor textures being drastically different from one another, you're never really going to have issues telling things apart. Something that was a really big problem in the Hotline Miami games, especially Hotline Miami 2. It seems that the developers really did put a lot of thought and effort into making sure that players always know what's going on in the game. So all in all, I'm giving Mr. Shifty a recommended out of 10. It's a short but very sweet game, which is very simple, but its simplicity is only positive. It knows what it wants and it does so very well. It's another fun that anyone can enjoy. I hope you enjoyed this little review, and if you did, then please let me know in the comments. If you didn't, then also let me know why you didn't like it. But before I go, a quick shout out to my patrons. Alexis Chavez, Dr. TNT, Ran Marty, Zachary Leclerc, and as always, Xenomite. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, have a wonderful day, and goodbye.